My next guest is a senior policy analyst for the Jewish Institute of National Security of America. Happy to welcome Erielle Davidson to the program. Erielle, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
This is a wild day. I feel like I'm sitting here thinking about 9 million other issues, and then seemingly out of nowhere is a massive announcement from the Middle East. Where did this come from, and what does it mean?
So this is the first time in 25 years that Israel will have normalized relations with another Arab country. 1979, it was Egypt, 1994, it's Jordan, and now in 2020, it'll be with the UAE. This is a huge policy milestone for the Trump administration, and I think it really underscores the notion that Trump's maneuvers, or at least his outlook on the Middle East, has definitely been a net positive for his administration. And it also shows that a lot of the orthodoxy that the Obama era or the Obama policy gurus had been practicing were just blatantly incorrect. And so I think that I think it shows that there were a lot of problematic posturing taking place in the Obama administration, and it's nice to see that the Trump administration is doing things, I would argue, correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like the Obama administration plan, in a way, was to make Iran stronger, essentially, so that they would be able to create some sort of tension that would lead to peace. This definitely was the alternate way to go, and it seems like there's a massive difference between what Trump is trying to do and what Obama was trying to do.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing now is a total upending of the narrative. There were a few sort of, I would say, myths that were sold to the American public under the Obama administration. One of them being what you touched upon, which is the idea that we need to rebalance the Middle East, that we need to give power back to Iran in order for there to be any sort of long-term peacemaking or peacekeeping in the Middle East. And this was just obviously, notionally incorrect. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we were sold is the only way to do this was to appease the Iranian regime. And so that's what essentially the Iran deal was born out of, was this idea that we only have two options. We either have war or appeasement. And so those, you have to choose your poison. And so now I think what the Trump administration has shown us is that there actually is a third path. You actually can strong arm, you can sanction the Iranian regime, and in the meantime, you can actually help to forge partnerships with other countries in the region. And I think, it really goes to show the fact that when Netanyahu was speaking today about this historic partnership, he was saying, I tip my hat to the Trump administration. The Trump administration played an instrumental role in putting together this normalization. We're going to start to see embassies within the two countries. We're going to start to see flights take place between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv. And we're also going to start to see a normalization of economic relationships, right? So this is the time now where we're going to start to see more partnerships in the energy sector and water. These are already things that Israel has going on with Jordan, particularly with energy and water. But it will be nice to see Israel normalize relations with another Arab country in the region, further confirming that, again, the myths we were sold about the Iran deal were just patently incorrect. And the fact that this is what Biden actually plans to run on is Obama 2.0 is another example in which we should say, wait a minute, if this is what if Biden's policy is to go back to the Obama era, that's precisely what didn't work.
There was a moment today that I almost felt bad for Ben Rhodes, and then I stopped myself, and it didn't happen. This is a big part of what's going on as far as foreign affairs for this election. I mean, we're told that Biden is the guy. This is his expertise. If he's good at anything, it's foreign affairs, and yet, I mean, this Iran deal looks worse and worse by the second. Are the American people engaged enough to know about it, though?
I think my hope, at least, is that the American people will start to see time and time again how, again, the orthodoxy within the foreign policy community has just been repeatedly wrong. So look back on moving the embassy to Jerusalem. We were told that was going to start World War III with regards to the Arab-Israeli conflict. That was not true. We were told the killing of Soleimani was also going to start World War III. That, too, was not true. We were told that applying sovereignty to the Golan was also going to cause World War III. That also was not true. There are so many times in the Trump administration or during Trump's tenure where the foreign policy community has just engaged in, I would say, this faux outrage, and then we're all sort of subjected to it, and we're all sitting on the edge of our seats. And all this doom and gloom that they predicted just doesn't come to fruition. And, I do think, again, it's sort of a stinging rebuke of the Obama era in a lot of ways, because a lot of the axioms that were the basis upon which he made his decisions were just incorrect. And so what I hope at least is that it forces those within the policy community to say, wait a minute, maybe we should rethink our approach here a bit. And that goes as well for those during the Biden campaign. I hope there's some soul searching that takes place after this type of deal goes through.
You point out that all those things aren't true. I noticed a little bit of a pattern there. It seemed like all of their initiatives, there was no truth in them, which is an interesting thing. Can you go a step further, though? Can you say not only were what the Biden-Obama approach, those things that they said were not true, but things like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, was that something that actually was a catalyst for this to actually happen?
I think it showed that Trump was not going to be held hostage to the demands of terrorists or those who showed that they were not willing to come to the negotiating table, right? And so already we're seeing the Palestinian Authority is starting to cool its relations with the UAE. And it goes to show again that there's an intransigence on the side of the Palestinian leadership that isn't going away. And I think the Obama administration really struggled to acknowledge this. They wanted to sort of say, well, both sides are at fault here. And I think at the end of the day, we're starting to see that, the rest of the Middle East is ready to move on. Another axiom we were sold was that there could never be long-term peace in the Middle East unless we solve the Arab-Israeli conflict. And what we're seeing now is that, actually we can form, we can help to foster relationships between Israel and other nations, and it doesn't need to be precipitated upon addressing the Palestinian issue. And so I think it goes to the heart again of this idea that Israel is the center of all conflict in the Middle East, and we're just seeing that that's not the case at all.
You see with the Trump administration, you have basically anyone in the Trump administration is completely hated by everyone in the media and on the left, and completely loved by everyone on the right. And, it's a bizarre thing. It's a partisan thing. One guy who gets a pretty rough deal from both sides, I think, though, is Jared Kushner, who has, been given lots of responsibility. He's mocked all the time for these things. He's given the hardest time from the media on the left. He's given the hardest time from even the Trump fans on the right. And yet here we are. I mean, we've seen a lot of things he's handled turn out pretty well. And this might be, at least he had a decent amount of contribution to this particular story. At least that's the way the reporting is going. Is he getting a raw deal?
I think he should be owed a lot of credit for this. And I think that, there are also talks that other Gulf states are going to join. There's potential that Bahrain might also start to normalize relations with Israel, which would be fantastic. So if that starts to have a domino effect, but the good kind of domino effect, not the Henry Kissinger domino effect, if this ends up being something that translates to other Arab states seeking normalization with Israel, I think we could actually see, a very transformative impact on the Middle East, and not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. Even, after the Trump years, even past if he's reelected or not reelected. And so I think, I do tip my hat to Jared Kushner because I do believe that he deserves a lot of credit for what's taking place right now.
We've seen over the years, Netanyahu has hinted to essentially the fact that he has a better relationship with some of these Arab states than is really known. And the idea is maybe this is sort of a sign of something that had been bubbling under for a long time, coming to the forefront and becoming public. Is this the sort of thing that can create a snowball where these other states that have already kind of have a decent relationship with Israel are going to be willing to take a step and say, yes, this is real, this is official?
I think that's right. I think there's a normalizing of normalization, right? So once one person takes the plunge, or once one party takes the plunge, we might also see other parties do the same. And I think this is also, due to blowback from the Iran deal, because once the Iran deal went into effect, the sanctions were lifted, and the Iranian economy in 2016 grew by about 10%. So it really did empower the mullahs in a variety of ways. And the response we started to see is this coalescing of countries that looked at Iran as a foe and started to coalesce around Israel. And so it actually, in some ways, the Iran deal sort of catalyzed or pushed other countries to say, wait a minute, do we really need to engage in sort of these, obstructionist tactics with Israel? Maybe we can work something out. And I do think that part of that push was a result of the Iran deal and Iran becoming emboldened, and other, parties in the Middle East saying, wait a minute, this is not good. And it's something that I would say is sort of maybe a silver lining of the Iran deal, however you want to phrase it, because it was an objectively terrible deal. But we're starting to see a realignment in the Middle East, partially as a result of it.
Erielle, it's 2020. I would like to say, I'd like to cover good news, but that's just not something we do on this show right now. So tell me, How does this get screwed up? Because it has to get screwed up. It's 2020. I mean, does this thing blow up before it even goes into effect? If Biden gets elected, does he blow it up? How does this end in disaster?
Oh, I've played this scenario out. I think my biggest concern would be that there's a tremendous amount of intransigence within the foreign policy community, particularly on the left, and there's a tremendous amount of unwillingness to tip their hat to Trump when he does something correctly or when his team does something correctly, whether it be Pompeo or someone within his national security team. So my concern is that if there is a Biden presidency, his administration will not learn from the successes of the Trump administration. So, there always is the phrase, learn from your mistakes. I also think you can learn from the success of others. And there's so much anti-Trump sentiment on the left that there's just this real unwillingness to call balls and strikes, and unwillingness to say, look, that was a win. A win is a win is a win. And what can we take away from this situation? I will say, though, that Biden's response, was lukewarmly congratulatory, but I still fear that his foreign policy team is going to be very much, rehashing the same old, tired, bad lines of the Obama administration, Ben Rhodes era. And so my biggest fear would be that they're just not going to learn from the successes of the Trump administration when it comes to the Middle East.
Well, I'm glad we got in at least a couple of negative mentions on Ben Rhodes. That means the interview is complete. Erielle Davidson, where can people find you? What's the best place for people to find your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at PoliticalL, so just the word political and then ELLE. And I also am at GINSA, and we're doing lots of good work over there, so you should definitely check us out.
Definitely. Erielle Davidson, Senior Policy Analyst for the Jewish Institute of National Security of America, GINSA. Thanks so much for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Stu. This is great.